Hi, welcome everyone. It's good to see so many familiar faces, both among the speakers and panelists, but also among the attendees. My name is Stefano Leclerc. I'm the head of the ICAP Secretariat, and I'll be hosting and moderating today's discussion. Before we start, I just wanted to say thank you and express deep gratitude on behalf of the ICAP Secretariat, but also on behalf of the broader ICAP membership to you for taking the time to be here with us today. As you know, we will be launching the ICAP Emission Trading Worldwide Status Report, and it is going on live on our website as we speak. But as we do every year, we wanted to use this, so the launch of the ICAP ETS status report, as an opportunity to have a bit of a discussion on the state of play in ETS implementation globally, and also as a way to look ahead and see what is next for the world of emission trading systems. As a note of context on ICAP and on why we do this in the first place, as you might know, ICAP stands for the International Carbon Action Partnership, and we are an international forum that brings together more than 40 governments from different levels of governance, from different geographies and different continents, that get together to jointly work on designing and implementing emission trading systems as a way to put a price on carbon and as a way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. One of the main products and publications that we do at ICAP, and the one that we like to call our flagship publication, is the ICAP Emission Trading Worldwide Status Report, which once a year, again, takes stock of ETS developments globally. You are probably all familiar with the report and with the report format by now, but we did change a few things since the last edition. So if you open the report, which again is coming on live on our website and on our social media channels right now, you will find a foreword signed by the ICAP co-chairs, which sets the scene for this year report. You will find a new section in the form of an extended executive summary, which will basically capture and outline the key trends and outlook for emission trading systems globally. You will also find, as you are probably familiar with, the ETS infographics that capture in a visual way some of the key dimensions and some of the key data underpinning the world of emission trading systems. You will find also the bulk of the report, which consists of 58 fact sheets on every single emission trading system in force, under development, or being considered worldwide, and we'll dive into some of these systems in second. And when I was saying that we did change a few things around this time, I was referring to the fact that for the first time we are including, as of this year, a wider range of different forms of emission trading systems. And more specifically, we have a more comprehensive coverage of intensity-based emission trading systems. As a quick additional word on that before we dive into the actual substance of the report. As you know, like within the broader carbon pricing landscape that you can see on the slide, the ICAP status report always traditionally focused on cap and trade systems, so on absolute emission trading systems, which is also the core focus of ICAP. Over time, and as a consequence of an increasing uptake of intensity-based emission trading systems or other hybrid forms of emission trading systems in the real world, we started to kind of modified the boundaries of the report, and it notably started with the inclusion of the Chinese ETS, which is an intensity-based emission trading system. And as a result, we decided to take stock of where we are in the world of emission trading system implementation this year. And we decided to include in a more comprehensive and structured way all forms of intensity-based emission trading systems. And my colleagues Anastasia and Luis will look at that in more detail in a second. But I wanted to provide some context on what is different from last year and what portion of what slice of the broader carbon pricing landscape we capture in the report, but more broadly we capture in the work that we do at ICAP. Things that will remain outside of the report coverage include carbon taxes, offsetting schemes, and the voluntary carbon market, which again remain outside of the boundary of the report, and also outside of the core mandate of ICAP as an organization. So what's on store on today's webinar? I'll stop talking in a second, and I'll give the floor to my colleagues Anastasia and Luis for a presentation of the key highlights from the ICAP ETS status report. They will tag team and they will take you through some of the key findings and key takeaways out of this year's report. And then again, we really want to use this as a chance to have a bit of a discussion on some of these key developments and key trends in the world of emission trading systems. So we're also really looking forward to having a panel discussion right after the presentation with a distinguished set of panelists. I will introduce them a bit later and after the initial presentation, but we will have on the panel discussion representatives from the European Commission, from the UK, from Canada, from Washington State, and from Brazil. So the presentation and the panel discussion will hopefully keep us busy for the first hour of today's webinar. And after that, we also want to leave plenty of time to a Q&A with the audience that will involve all of you as attendees. So don't wait for the Q&A to start, but as we go through the presentation and as we go through the panel discussion, feel free to use the Q&A function of the webinar to put in any question or comment that comes to mind, and we will get to them again in the Q&A segment of today's webinar. So if you want to ask anything to the ICAP team or to one of the panelists or to the broader panel, feel free to put that in the Q&A function of the webinar. With that, I think we are ready to start diving into the actual substance of today's discussion. And again, we will be starting with a presentation of the key highlights from the status report. And I'll give the floor to my colleague Anastasia first and Luis later for that. So with that, Anastasia, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Stefano. And it's my pleasure to introduce you to our status report together with my colleague Luis. Every year, there's much to explore in this year's edition, and I will start with an overview of the main messages of our report that you can find in more details in our newly introduced Trends and Outlook section. Next slide, please. To us, there are 4 key messages in our report. First, more and more governments worldwide are adopting ETSs. We found that emerging economies are increasingly adopting ETSs. For instance, Indonesia has taken a significant step towards launching by recently initiating an ETS focused on the power generation sector. And countries like India and Brazil are also making important progress in advancing their own ETS frameworks. Yet, it's not just emerging economies that are embracing this shift. Developed economies are also making strides. For instance, Canada and the EU are currently in the planning stages for launching new systems. Second, we are witnessing the emergence of new and innovative designs in the realm of ETSs. The design and development of new ETS is giving rise to a new generation of hybrids and innovative systems, sometimes deviating a little bit from the traditional cap and trade blueprint. We're, for example, observing a surge on in intensity-based emissions trading systems like the Chinese ETS. And as a result, we've decided to expand the scope of our report to include these additional systems in this year's report, as Stefano mentioned earlier on. Coming to our third message, established ETSs are improving, expanding, and aligning with net zero targets. So governments worldwide are not solely focusing on introducing new ETSs, they're also enhancing existing ones to align with the ambitious objective of achieving net zero emissions by the middle of the century. There are many examples, including California, Quebec, the UK, South Korea, and many more, where efforts are underway to refine and expand the ETS frameworks. Coming to our final main message, prices hold, guaranteeing another year of record revenues. So the combination of, on the one hand, consistently high prices levels across various systems, along with, on the other hand, a growing adoption of auctioning as a means of allocation, has resulted in yet another record-breaking year for auction revenue allocation. And my colleague Lewis will delve into the details on revenues later on in this presentation. Coming to our next slide, showing the key numbers of our status report. Let's begin with coverage. There are currently 36 emission trading systems worldwide, encompassing 9.9 gigatons of CO2 emissions. This constitutes over 18% of global GHG emissions. Moving on to revenue highlights. In 2023 alone, these systems generated $74 billion in revenue. This accounts for almost a quarter of all revenues generated since 2007, totaling $303 billion. Regarding development progress, currently we have 14 ETSs in various stages of development, with an additional 8 systems under consideration. And the final number is that nearly 1/3 of the world's population lives in regions covered by an ETS, and additionally, jurisdictions representing 58% of global GDP are using emissions trading. So this is our next slide. It's our emissions trading map, which I'm sure many of you may already recognize. It provides us with a snapshot of the current landscape of ETSs across the globe. And there's a lot of information to delve into. And while I could spend hours on the slide, I'd like to offer a concise overview of some of the most important developments that have unfolded over the past 12 months. And I will start with Europe. Has been a very eventful year for climate policy within the European Union. The EU ETS remains the oldest and the largest ETS in terms of trading volume and value. In the first half of 2023, the EU implemented significant reforms to their ETS framework, and these reforms not only increased ambition, but also expanded the scope of the EU ETS to include, for example, the maritime sector. Additionally, as many of you may have heard, a new ETS will soon be introduced for buildings, road transports, and other sectors. And we are very lucky to have Mette today with us, who will provide us with further insights into the EU developments. Moving on to the UK, the UK ETS commenced operation in 2021 following the UK's departure from the EU. Last year, in 2023, a series of reforms were implemented to align the scheme with the UK's long-term emissions objectives. The government announced plans to extend the scheme to include new sectors such as maritime transport and waste incineration. And here again, we're very pleased to welcome Hannah today, who will be able to provide us with more detailed insights later on. And lastly, there have been important developments in Turkey. Turkey has taken notable steps towards establishing a new ETS. The government is currently drafting a climate law to define crucial features, and they're planning to initiate activities under the Partnership for Market Implementation. So those are some of the highlights in Europe. And now I would like to move across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas, as it has been a very busy year in this part of the world as well. And I would like to highlight 5 systems today. The first system is the Canada federal system. In 2023, the federal government amended its federal BPS to enhance the system's stringency. Furthermore, in December, Canada announced the development of a federal cap and trade system for the oil and gas sector to support its net zero ambitions. And here we have Simon on the panel who will provide us with further insights into this system. It has been an important year for New York State as well. New York is actively working to develop and to launch a cap and invest program aiming for significant greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And it is collaborating very closely with stakeholders to ensure fairness and effectiveness. Coming to Washington, the Cap and Invest program in Washington completed its final year in 2023, currently they're exploring the possibility of linking with the joint California-Quebec market, and Derek will share more insights with us on this matter. Then comes California and Quebec. The 2 jurisdictions have over a decade of operational experience and are considering revisions and amendments to their programs set to be implemented throughout 2024. And in 2024, Quebec and California will celebrate their 10th anniversary of linkage, which is very exciting. And finally, coming to Brazil, it has been a very important year for Brazil. Brazil is contemplating a new bill to initiate its own ETS, and this bill would establish the governance framework and define a legal foundation for obligations by covered entities. And Beatrice here in the panel will provide us with more details in a moment. And finally, moving across the map to the Asia-Pacific region, the main focus of today's webinar is the Americas and Europe, but there have been important developments in the Asia-Pacific region. And I would like to quickly highlight 3 jurisdictions at the end of my review of this map, namely China, India, and Japan. Beginning with China. China launched a highly anticipated offset scheme at the end of 2023, creating a new market for domestic emissions reduction projects. And in addition to that, the government recently published a new ETS regulation that will significantly increase penalties for non-compliance and for market manipulation. In the same region, India is actively developing its own carbon markets. The compliance scheme is set to be introduced through a phased transition starting in 2024. And the last jurisdiction I would like to highlight today is Japan. Japan combines various carbon pricing instruments to achieve its net zero goals and has recently launched a voluntary baseline and credit system called GXETS. And Japan is planning to make the system mandatory in the coming years. I leave it to that for now, but obviously, please feel free to delve into our report for all the details on more jurisdictions around the world. And we'll now dig a little bit deeper into the details. And for that, I would like to pass the floor to my colleague, Lewis.
Cool, thank you, Anastasia. Yeah, so here we start by talking about the global expansion of emissions trading schemes. Things really got started in 2005 with the start of the EU ETS, and that covered about 5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. You can see since then there've been regular additions of schemes over the years, with a really major step up in 2021 when the China National Scheme came into force. And today, coverage represents 18% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Now, one thing it's useful to point out here is that over the last 4 years, the coverage has remained relatively stable despite those new schemes coming on. This really shows the interaction between declining caps under those existing schemes on the one hand, with new schemes coming online on the other. So emissions trading is almost like a victim of its own success in that regard. Looking to the future, signs are that we'll continue to see more schemes being added to this plot. For example, there are schemes under development in Brazil, which Beatrice will talk about in a little while. Turkey, Ukraine, India, Japan, and a number of states in the US as well. So if we move on to sectoral coverage. So each color on this infographic represents a sector, and the blue donuts in the middle of the circle represent industry and energy. And you can see those are the most commonly covered sectors. Moving out from there, around a third of the schemes shown here cover buildings and transport. And from there, we see a range of approaches. For example, with 4 schemes covering emissions from waste, and Lonely Old New Zealand covering emissions from forestry there. Conspicuously absent on this plot is biogenic emissions from agriculture. There are still no schemes around the world that include those emissions or includes surrender obligations for those emissions. We're seeing a trend of jurisdictions looking to expand the scope of their schemes, building on some of the points that Anastasia was making earlier. Germany and Austria have launched an ETS for fuels. The EU ETS has brought in maritime transport, and the EU ETS 2 will cover fuels used in road transport and buildings. So as well as that sectoral coverage variation, we also see variation in the share of a jurisdiction's emissions that are covered and the point of regulation. Coverage starts at about 10% for a couple of the North American schemes, all the way up to 90% of the emissions in Korea's economy. And then when it comes to the point of regulation, some systems are only downstream, like the EU ETS. Some are only upstream, like that in Germany, and others are mixed, like those in California and in Quebec. If you move us on to the next slide, Stefano. So that brings us to allowance price developments. In the top left here, you can see the prices in USD across 2023. And it's really tricky there to kind of pick out any sort of unifying trend. If you're being brave, you might say kind of broadly stable, but I don't know if we want to be brave on that brave. Taking some particular examples, prices in the EU and the UK hit early highs in 2023 around February, and then softened over the rest of the year. On the other hand, some of the North American systems, such as those in California, Quebec, and the RGGI, showed steady overall price gains over the course of the year. So if we move on to auction revenue, Stefano. So for those schemes that utilize auctioning, those prices obviously translate into revenue. And last year we saw the highest annual revenue collected by ETSs around the world at just over 74 billion USD, up from 63 billion in 2022. This is being driven by a combination of relatively high prices in several systems, like those in the UK and the EU, and the increasing use of auctioning as an allocation method. And you can see there it follows a really strong upward trend since about 2020. There's been those big steps up. In the pie graph on the left there, you can see that the EU ETS is in dark blue, Germany's in the lighter purple, and the UK is in the darker purple. They really represent the lion's share of the revenue gathered. And it's really that combination of significant use of auctioning, higher prices, and covering a lot of emissions. In general, we're seeing, back on the other one, Stefano. In general, we're seeing a trend towards more use of auction-based allocation methods compared to free allocation. For example, in Washington, Washington has adopted an auction-based allocation method from the outset for its scheme. And the reinvestment of auctioning proceeds is so central that scheme is labeled as a cap and invest scheme as opposed to a cap and trade scheme. And New York State is another good example there. So that brings us to the use of revenues. So with such high revenues being generated by schemes around the world, the next question then is where that money is being used. And this year we really sought to dig into this theme and investigate how jurisdictions earmark ETS funds or not. And this is in general an important theme at the moment, as we're seeing many governments around the world need to make careful decisions about where they allocate resources and balance their short-term priorities around that support acceptance, like the cost of living and inflation, against crucial long-term challenges like climate change. So there are a range of approaches that we see around the world for the use of revenues, with funds earmarked for use around 5 main themes, and that's what you see in the infographic here. So these are around general budget, assistance to individuals and households, mitigation activities, low carbon innovation, and then there's sort of a bucket there for other development objectives, including education and health. So this infographic is a stylized Venn diagram. So if a jurisdiction appears in a given sort of peanut shape there, that category applies. So in general, if a jurisdiction is closer to the middle of the diagram, it means more apply, and if it's closer to the outside of the diagram, it means less. So you can see there's a bit of a cluster up the top around general budget with New Zealand, the UK, Switzerland, and or a set of the Chinese schemes there. And obviously this gives those governments maximum flexibility for how that revenue is used. We also see that a lot of schemes dedicate funding to climate mitigation in some form. That's the dark orange bubble, peanut. And low carbon innovation is also really well represented there. And looking to the future, I don't think we'd be surprised if we see more earmarking of funds. So schemes move away from that general budget into some of those other categories. In particular, as we see responses to distributional impacts and trying to maintain public support for trading schemes become more important. So that brings me to the end of my slides, and I'll hand it back to you there, Stefano.
Thank you, Lewis, and thank you also, Anastasia, for the great overview. This is indeed the end of this interesting presentation. Before we move on to the panel discussion, I just wanted to remind everyone that you can find the status report, which has just been published on our website. On the ICAP website, alongside a set of publications, products, and tools that visualize information and data and insights related to the state of play of ETS implementation globally. A couple of quick things that I wanted to highlight are that, as I just said, if you go on our website right now, you'll find the new report. The information that is in the report is also already available on the interactive ETS map that we have on our website. So you can access the same system-specific information both in the report, but also in the interactive map. And I also wanted to highlight a couple of upcoming products that we will be launching. So sometime next week, we will be launching a newly established ICAP podcast, which will consist of a series of conversations about key topics and jurisdictions and systems that we think are interesting and worth a separate discussion. So we'll be working on a few episodes, and the first one will be coming online next week. So keep an eye out on our website and on our social media channels for this new ICAP product. And I also wanted to highlight that most of you, I guess, will be familiar with APE, the Allowance Price Explorer, which is also a tool that we have on our website that allows you to visualize allowance price data in key emission trading systems. We are working on relaunching a newly updated and improved version of APE. It will be available towards the end of this month or early next month. Again, we will put out communications on our website and on our social media channels when that becomes available. But you will be able to find more information both about primary and secondary market data, about more systems that what we have featured today. It will have a more user-friendly interface, and most notably, it will also feature data on the auctioning revenue that are collected by different systems, pretty much in the same line as the infographic that Lewis presented. Again, more on that to our usual communication channels, but expect to find additional products and materials on our website in the near future, alongside all of the existing ones. With that, we'll move on to the second segment of today's webinar, which will be a panel discussion with a selected set of speakers. So we invited speakers from some of the jurisdictions that showed the most interesting developments in the last 12 months, and that are also captured in the report. And we wanted to have a bit of a conversation with them on, to explore a bit further some of these developments. So today with us we have Mette Queen, who is head of unit for carbon markets and clean mobility at DG Clima in the European Commission. Hannah Lewis, who is the head of policy for the UK ETS at the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero in the UK. Simon Tudiver, who is manager for the Carbon Markets Bureau at Environment and Climate Change in Canada. Derek Nixon, who is the Capital Invest manager at the Washington State Department of Ecology in Washington State. And Beatriz Soares da Silva, who is the General Coordinator of Green Finance at the Ministry of Development, Industry, Trade and Services in Brazil. So thank you to all of you for joining us today. I'll take the slide now so that our tiles and our faces will be a bit bigger on screen. And welcome everyone. Thanks again for joining us today. As we usually do, I would like to start the panel discussion with a very first quick round of questions. And as we often do, we're always interested to hear, what market practitioners and people like you that are at the forefront of ETS implementation back home make of the latest developments and the state of play that we just presented. So as a super quick first round, I wanted to ask each one of you what stood out from the presentation that Anastasia and Lewis just delivered, and if there's anything in particular that caught your attention and you would like to highlight. So taking the same order as we have it in the slide, we'll start from Mette. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Stefano, and congratulations to you and your team on this 11th edition of your status report. It's really a good, unique compendium of what has happened in carbon pricing implementation worldwide, and I think it's really great. I know a couple of things that I just would like to share. So one is that we see really this growing momentum behind carbon pricing, and this is now largely driven by new countries, and this is really welcome news for us. So at the end of 23 we see 36 carbon pricing instruments in force, and as you mentioned, also 22 that are either under development or under consideration. So I think this is excellent news. You mentioned that there was a paradox in your presentation. So on the one hand, we have more schemes, but on the other hand, it covers the same share of emissions, 80% worldwide. And this is, because some of the caps are shrinking and then we have new ones that are added. But I think this is the way it goes. What we could be interesting in exploring is how emerging policies, these new emission trading systems with new features, how they can be aligned with the overarching climate targets and mitigation efforts. I think that's an interesting angle to look into. You know that in our experience in the EU, we see that the cap reduction and having a clear trajectory for cap reduction, it really is what gives stakeholders confidence in our policy. So they know both environmental and also the expected economic outcomes. And this gives a very strong price signal that is factored into the investment appraisals. that we really need in order to transform the economy. So that was one element. Then I have another element, and that is we see these carbon pricing policies under consideration and development, and what is we could explore, it could be explored, what is it that's needed to take them into the operational status. So from consideration, development into becoming operational, what is needed. And then I have one last point. We are very much aware that experience between jurisdictions is not really directly replicable. We are all a bit different, but at the same time, we are all a bit of a source of inspiration for each other. And we are very committed to sharing the experience we already have and supporting other countries in development of carbon pricing, and with a specific focus on domestic compliance policies. This is the highest priorities for us. But once again, congratulations on your latest report.
Thank you for the kind words, Mette, and I fully agree with your points as well. And actually, like a couple of things that you brought up are already good questions that we could be asking Simon, for example, in a bit about how Canada reconciles an intensity-based system with the NDC targets, and also for Beatrice as someone who's working on developing a new system around what kind of assistance they need. But we'll park that for now. We'll come back to the questions later. I'll go to Hannah now, asking you what stood out to you out of the presentation.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Stefano, and also, yes, to say a huge thank you to ICAP. I have to say that the annual status report, I mean, it's a huge achievement. It's also a very much valued resource for policymakers, because the ability to collaborate and learn from each other worldwide really enhances all of our policy making, and the work of ICAP continues to be hugely valued in this space. In terms of the status report, I mean, I agree with everything that Mette said. Just a few points that I would reflect upon. Firstly, again, really exciting to see the continued acceleration of carbon pricing schemes worldwide. I think it certainly illustrates the importance of forums for Skillshare and for collaboration. It's really encouraging in terms of strengthening global efforts on climate change, and also I think is an important development for supporting with challenges faced by schemes such as mitigating carbon leakage risk. And it is interesting to see some of the wider policy developments that have taken place over the last year, including growth of things such as carbon border adjustment mechanisms. Secondly, really interesting to see the increasing innovation in scheme design. I think it's certainly clear there's no blueprint for carbon pricing. Adaptability, flexibility are really important characteristics of emissions trading. And it's really positive, I think, to see how ETSs are being designed in different ways to respond to different challenges, and that they have that ability to be adapted, whether they be structural, economical, or political challenges. I think it also creates new opportunities for us as policymakers to learn from each other. It's still very much an innovative, creative space for policymaking. And in the UK, and I'll talk about it later on, we're currently grappling with some new challenges as we reform the mechanics of our scheme, how to ensure ETS delivers the right investment signal, works effectively with wider policy landscape. And these things are not easy, and we're very keen, certainly, to learn from others. And if there are new ways of doing things, then that's always very interesting to us. Final thing, just to say, really, really positive, of course, to see how existing schemes are being strengthened, and that there are now more and more schemes looking to align with net zero. One challenge we have found is that defining in practice what net zero alignment means when it comes to ETS design is certainly not straightforward. and it means different things depending on whether you have an absolute cap or if you allow offsets into the market, etc. That will all bring their own challenges. In the UK, we've approached this through the UK's net zero strategy, because it's very helpful, I think, to look at the whole economy context, the whole climate policy landscape when thinking about how an ETS scheme actually works in the context of net zero. But again, a really interesting area and poses a lot of questions regarding the future of emissions trading schemes. I guess in that with a net zero goal, the ultimate objective of an emissions trading scheme is to make it self-extinct. So it poses us with an interesting situation there. And final thing, just to note in terms of the future, but I'll say more about this later. In the UK, we are very interested in things that were touched upon in the report, including role for potentially greenhouse gas removal technology incorporation into the scheme. And I think there are a lot of sort of exciting areas for future development that are now, getting a lot more traction. Sorry, that was everything for me, and thank you so much again.
Thank you, Hannah. And indeed, I mean, the UK is one of the proactive thinkers in terms of trying to figure out what comes next for ETS and what net zero alignment really means. And again, a lot on that front happened over the last 12 months in the UK. It was fascinating to see how that discussion is evolving, and we also did learn a lot from that. I mean, as you know, ICAP is also doing quite a lot of work on the future of ETS and on what it means to have an ETS with a net zero cap. And from that point of view, the discussion that is happening in the UK was really interesting to observe. And we can come to that. We can come back to that in a bit in the Q&A. Some people, I'm sure people will be interested in that. Simon, over to you. And Canada is one of those new jurisdictions that we added to the report this year, and especially in terms of featuring the federal, but also the provincial and territorial level output-based pricing systems. And we're looking forward to hearing more about that in a second. But I also wanted to ask you what stood out for you if you look at the latest status report.
Yeah, thanks very much, Stefano, and thanks everyone for the insightful comments so far. And I think I'll echo some of the ones that have already been said, but also just starting off with echoing the congratulations. I think this is the report compiles a lot of really excellent information analysis. Unsurprisingly, I think as always from ICAP, we expect that, but you've kind of done it again. So really appreciate that. It's definitely kind of a key source of a lot of information for us. And also, as you said, really pleased to see the inclusion of a number of the Canadian systems this time around as slightly different flavors of ETS, the kind of intensity-based systems that we have a range of here in Canada. So I think some of the things that stood out for me are similar in a way to others. I'll pick up on kind of what Hannah talked about in terms of the innovation across systems, which as you know, we see we have a bit of a microcosm of that in Canada with a number of different types of systems in different parts of the country. And so we're really, I think, excited to see that expanding globally as well, with a lot of different kind of experimentation on how ETSs can work. And I think just interested in following that. I think we're sort of continually reviewing and assessing our own systems domestically to make sure they're continuing to do what they're set out to do. And I think having more examples of a variety of approaches, I think, can only improve that kind of how we evaluate and improve our systems over time. I think another thing that stood out for me was kind of the trend toward greater interjurisdictional efforts more broadly, kind of in that can mean a range of different things. So, from things like border adjustments to linkages between systems to kind of various political initiatives to gather countries together. I think thinking about kind of working cooperatively internationally in this space is kind of a good reminder, like, you know, emission trading systems are kind of by their nature particularly well suited to collaborating across jurisdictions. Of course, there's a lot of detailed design complexities involved in that, but I think it's a good example of, you know, when we have these broad challenges and we have a lot of countries interested in working together, an ETS is potentially a really good solution for kind of turning that into real world action and in how we can collaborate across jurisdictions. And then I also just wanted to note that that infographic you put up at the top, Stefano, on the kind of typology of different carbon pricing systems, I thought that was really a really useful tool. I mean, I think there's a lot of great infographics in this report, but that one in particular, to me, kind of brought together a range of different types of systems and approaches into a kind of common understanding and nomenclature. And I find that really useful for communication purposes. So thank you for kind of doing the work of grouping those things together. I think I can see using that when trying to describe, you know, how different systems work together and what is carbon pricing broadly, which I think often still needs explanation. So anyway, thanks again for including us, and pleased to be here, and looking forward to more info from others too.
Thank you. And I thought you would take the debate and comment on, you know, the relatively flat percentage of greenhouse gas emissions covered in the context of the global carbon pricing challenge. But we'll we'll come back to that in a bit. But I think it is interesting, this you know, trend whereby any addition of new systems is offset effectively by declining caps. And again, it's also good food for thought for the global carbon pricing challenge, but more on that in the discussion later. On to Derek now. I also wanted to ask you quickly what's interesting or what stood out from you out of this year's report.
Yeah, well, again, as others said, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I always love reading the ICAP reports, and I would also plug the publications, which you kind of included at the bottom there for potential people developing ETSs. That there's a lot of good information in those as you want to dive deeper into industrial decarbonization or different topics where it's the minutia within the minutia that really sets you up for success, because there's a lot of tricky design choices there. So I think as I've looked over the years at the ICAP ETS reports, I think it's inspirational to see the growth in the number of programs and the emissions, even though there's success in that dropping back down again, which is great. So I think for us, where that's helpful is the speed with which we scaled our program and set up our program involved a lot of new people coming in. So there were very few of us who had prior experience in carbon pricing. And so seeing other jurisdictions able to succeed and being able to kind of quickly accelerate their knowledge through the ICAP reports has been helpful. I also really like the use of revenue there. I run the auction, so I'm somewhat biased of like what to focus on. But I think it's useful to synthesize very different approaches into a single graphic that we can look at. Yeah, I'll stop there for now. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, Derek, and it's great to have you as well. We had Washington State last year when the program was you know, just being set up, and it's nice to have you back after the first year of operation has been completed. And again, we'll dig into that in a second. To round off this first round, I also wanted to ask you, Beatrice, what you found interesting out of the report.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation to be here today. I have been working with carbon market agenda in Brazil for more than 10 years now, and I'm a regular reader of the ICAP status report. It has always been a reference for me for keeping up to date with the development of ETS around the world. So I'm very happy to be in this panel today, launching the ICAP 2024. Among all the relevant information that report brings, what caught my attention this year was the mention that we are going to track the more innovative systems and that deviate from the cap and trade model. I think it's very good to have this more broader view of the instrument, especially those based on emissions intensity targets. I think we can learn a lot from it. Brazil has already adopted a system based on absolute emissions, reflecting our NDC. But for me, who has been studying these systems for some years now, it will be very interesting to see how this non-traditional design options will evolve over time. So I'm already looking forward to see the ICAP status report from next year to see how this is going to evolve. And congratulations for the work well done. It's very useful for us who's in the countries trying to set up our systems and see all the experience from other countries is very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Bea. And we can dive right into the second round of the panel discussion. And starting again with Mette, I wanted to ask you if you could give us a quick overview on the state of play for emissions trading in the European Union.
Yes, I would be delighted to do so. So we finalized in 2023 the revision of the EU ETS directive. It was a major revision, and it was to align with the minus 55% emission reduction by 2030. So with that, we have tightened the cap, and we have also enlarged the scope. We have included maritime transport into the existing ETS. And then we have also created a new ETS, ETS2, for emissions from buildings, road transport, and small industry. And I saw in the chat there was a question on this new ETS2, and I can answer immediately that no, offsetting will not be allowed in the new ETS. So now it starts only in 2027, but we start monitoring of emissions already in 2025, but then only surrendering in 27. So what we're doing now is we work very much on all the implementing legislation related to the emission. We are updating the monitoring and reporting rules, free allocation rules, and guidance for operators, plus a number of other things. So moving to another new thing, we have just got the emissions from the emission trading system for 2023. We published the numbers last week. They're not final, but nearly final. And I'm very happy to say we have the highest annual reductions we have ever had in the EU ETS, approximately 16% in 1 year. And I mean, this is just amazing. So it's mainly the power sector that has reduced with 24% in just 1 year. And the decrease is largely due to really big renewable energy electricity production, wind and solar primarily. And coal and gas have both gone down. And we have also seen more energy efficiency. So there has been basically improvements on all fronts, but renewable has really gone enormously ahead. So also because we saw because of the Ukraine crisis, we had a switch from gas to coal. But now we have these very good developments. Another good development is the revenues. So in 2023, we had revenues that amounted to 43.6 billion euros. And as you know, most of it goes directly to the budgets of the member states. But then we also have the Innovation Fund and modernization of energy systems in a number of member states. And a new thing with the revision is that member states must use all their revenues for climate and energy purposes, as well as social purposes. So this we will see in the next report next year, how that is evolving. Yeah, we have also the new Social Climate Fund. It comes with the revenues from the new ETS2. and that is really a new thing to support the most vulnerable groups to decarbonize. So used for transport and for heating and cooling in buildings, and also with direct income support for energy and transport poverty. A last new thing I would like to mention is that in February we launched a new communication on a 2040 recommendation for a target, and we have recommended that the EU's net greenhouse gas emissions should be reduced with 90% in 2040 compared to 1990. So we have two tracks now. One is we are implementing, and we need to focus on implementing our very high 2030 target, but we are also in parallel looking to how we reach climate neutrality with an intermediate 2040 recommendation. The actual target will also be proposed with the new commission, as we have elections upcoming and a new commission coming in Europe this autumn. This new target of this proposal for a 90% target will require contributions from all sectors. And you mentioned ETS has never been implemented for agricultural sector. Let's see if that's what we will come up as a proposal in the ETS in Europe. It's certainly under consideration, but there are many voices in this space of whether this should be the thing or not. So I think we can say while we are increasing our efforts in this space, we also look to other countries and would like to help turning pledges into concrete policy actions. And part of this communication that we had was that the EU announced that we will increase our diplomacy efforts on carbon pricing. And we are going to establish, or we are just establishing now, a new task force to advance the deployment of domestic and as well as international and voluntary policies. So here we are just at the beginning of setting up this task force, but soon I think we will be operational, and then you will hear more from that as well. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Mette. As always, a lot of interesting developments out of the EU, and congratulations again for finalizing such a big reform package that will align the EU ETS with what will come next. Over to Hannah now, as the UK has also been quite busy plotting for the official direction of travel for the UK ETS. Can you tell us where things are at?
Yes, of course. So it's been a very busy year on the UK ETS. I'll provide just some headline facts and figures, and then a bit of a summary of developments over the last year, and maybe a quick look ahead to what's coming up. So just a bit of background. UK ETS launched January 2021. It replaced the UK's participation in the EU ETS. The scheme, it's run by what we call the UK ETS Authority. So it consists of UK government and the governments of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. The scheme, it's now been running for over 3 years. I think overall, we're really pleased with how it's been operating. We have an effectively functioning market and really good compliance rates. So overall, really pleased. The scheme at the moment, it covers approximately 25% of territorial emissions, covering emissions from UK's power sector, energy intensive industries, and emissions from aviation, domestic flights and flights from the UK to the European Economic Area. Roughly, it covers around 1,000 installations and around 400 aircraft operators. So in terms of developments, so following the launch of the scheme, we have been looking at ways to really develop and strengthen the scheme and make sure it can play a central role in delivering on the UK's net zero commitment. When we launched the scheme, for example, we didn't have a comprehensive net zero strategy in the UK. We now have one. So we've been looking at making sure it's very much aligned with the sectoral effort share and conclusions of that strategy. So in July last year, we published a number of wide-ranging structural reforms of the scheme. So these included, most fundamentally, a revision of the UK ETS cap to bring it in line with a net zero trajectory. And to do this, we've aligned it with the traded sector effort share as set out in the UK's net zero strategy. The revised cap came into force this year, and overall, it constitutes a 30% reduction from the previously legislated cap. So it's quite a significant jump. Just to give you an illustration of that, so the annual cap in 2023 was around 147 million allowances, and in 2024 it's 92 million. So it's a big drop. In addition to that, we have redistributed some allowances currently held in reserve to smooth the transition. The transition between 2023 and 2024. Secondly, we've adjusted the pot of allowances we have available to give out for free, so that is in line with the net zero cap. It will have been reduced, and it is now set as a fixed percentage of the overall cap. We've also announced that we will be phasing out free allocation for the aviation sector in its entirety by 2026. And we've announced that we will be expanding the scheme to domestic maritime from 2026 and energy from waste and waste incineration from 2028. And these are both subject to further consultations that will be coming along the line, looking at the detailed implementation of how that will work. And then finally, we've also stated an intention to include engineered greenhouse gas removals in the UK ETS, subject to further consultation and ensuring there will be robust monitoring, reporting, verification processes in place. Following these announcements, we have gone on to issue some further technical consultations at the end of last year. So these include a review that we're currently conducting into market policy. So when we first implemented the UK ETS, we designed market policy really to provide stabilizers for a new scheme, for a new market. And now we want to make sure we have appropriate market policy mechanisms for an established and maturing scheme. So we consulted on a range of policy mechanisms, including a minded to position to implement a supply adjustment mechanism. It's not a final decision, but we are consulting on potential design of these mechanisms. We also are in the middle of a review, the final stage of a review into free allocation policy. So we consulted at the beginning of this year on rules for distributing free allowances. And this will look at how to improve the free allocation calculation, looking at the measurement of carbon leakage risk, the approach to setting benchmarks, and how to take into account technological availability. And the changes to free allocation are due to be implemented in 2026 for the next allocation period. And then the final thing I would just note here is that in parallel, at the end of last year, the UK government announced that it will be introducing a carbon border adjustment mechanism in 2027. So one of the things we are looking at very closely is, of course, how free allocation and rules under the ETS may need to be adjusted for CBAM covered sectors in future. So that's something that we're looking at very closely. So looking ahead, as I mentioned, we have further work planned to consult on technical details around scope expansion to maritime and waste and greenhouse gas removal technologies. In the longer term, we have announced that we intend to legislate to continue the UK ETS beyond 2030 and to 2050. And we have a commitment to ensure the scheme remains aligned with a net zero trajectory, which is really, really important. We're also considering extending the length of the next phase of the scheme so it aligns with carbon budgets. But that's something that, again, is at an early stage of consideration. And then finally, to say, I mean, given the role of carbon pricing in, of course, enabling cost-effective decarbonisation, we've also said that we will continue to explore expanding the scheme to more sectors of the economy. And we've set out in our long-term pathway the sort of considerations that we would take into account before making those decisions. So those are the key headlines for me, and of course, really interested to hear from others as well.
Thank you, Hannah. Let's move on to Derek now. And again, the Cap and Invest program in Washington State has been in operation for a year, ever since January 1st, 2023. So I'd be keen to hear from you how did the first year of operation went, and what are the takeaways so far?
Just finding the unmute button. So I think the takeaways for me are still probably similar to what Luke spoke about last year, that it's possible to scale a program very quickly and set it up. And we have demonstrated that that is possible for other jurisdictions. I think it's also demonstrated the need to cooperate with other jurisdictions. So while we announced with California and Quebec that we were interested in exploring linkage jointly 2 weeks ago, they were already providing significant technical support to us early on and consistently. I also came from the California program, so that was really helpful to bring that knowledge. And I think we're paying it forward with other jurisdictions now who are evaluating starting a program. So I think part of it is that recent experience can be helpful for other jurisdictions, and it's very important to share knowledge. I think another thing is just the success. So we've held a year of auctions, we've had a year of robust trading, and we've brought in I think over 160 participants into the program now, and they're engaged, interested parties. There's a futures market that we didn't anticipate getting set up quite so quickly, but it's great to see that liquidity outside of our auctions. And I think now we're starting to look at a second phase of evolving our program. So we got the core details established, but now we're starting a rulemaking on offsets in our program, on electricity in our program. And because we passed a law on details that would align us for linkage, potential linkage with California and Quebec, we're now going to have to implement at some point a rulemaking that would do that in our program. So I think maybe something from our program is there's this initial rush and you get it right and you start, and that's the most important thing. And then after that, you can evolve while still providing the stability and knowledge to market participants about what the rules of the road are, and just being available for everyone, both as other jurisdictions were available for us and now as we're available for future jurisdictions. So
thanks for that. And whenever we do capacity building activities, we almost always get asked, how long does it take, and what does it take to set up a new system? And your example is a testimony that with the right political commitment, the right resources, and the right people, you can set up a system successfully in an extremely short time frame. So that would be really useful learning, as you said, also for other jurisdictions as we move forward. Speaking of systems that are being developed and set up, I want to move on to Beatriz and ask you to give us a quick overview of the developments on the ETS front in Brazil. And I know that you have a couple of slides, so feel free to pull them up. Over to you, Bea. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefano. The Lula government, since the beginning, the climate change agenda has been as a priority. So in April last year, the government set up a working group to prepare a draft bill establishing the emissions trading system in the country. The federal government proposal was presented as a bill by Senator Leila Barros in August 2003, and it was approved by the Senate with some modifications in October 2003. Then it was forwarded to the Chamber of Deputies, and the bill was approved in the last session of the year, December 21st, and having undergone major modifications, especially regarding REDD+ activities. So in February, the proposal came back to Senate, and now the bill awaits the appointment of a new rapporteur. But the federal government is closely following the progress of the bill and is very committed to its approval still this year. So just to give you a flavor of what we have in the first draft and what the changes were. This is the first draft we wrote in the government. The law has 5 chapters. The first one establishing the Brazilian emissions trading systems, the SBC as a cap and trade. The second chapter deals with the system itself, brings principle and characteristics, governance, provisions for national allocation plan, accreditation and de-accreditation of offsets methodologies, the central registry, the resources. The chapter 3 is dealt with the regulated agents and their obligations. So identify what is under regulation, give provisions for monitoring plans and MRV, infractions and penalties. We have a chapter on the offsets, the supply of carbon credits, which including provisions for ITMOs and carbon credits generated in areas occupied traditionally by indigenous people in traditional communities. And we have a final chapter on the transitional provisions, the transitional period for implementation, and some provisions for the authorization of ITMOs. This is the structure of the law. Just to have a visual impression of what the major changes were, this is the text approved in the Senate. They excluded agriculture. They said the SBC is not applicable to agriculture. They clarify some definitions on the REDD concept that was already foreseen. And our system is going to account for removals. So they clarify a little bit on what's going to happen when the regulated agents has net removals. They bring some, in the governance levels of the governance, they create another advisory board with composed only by the representatives from the sectors that are going to be regulated. And then included one more year for sector MRV preparation that we haven't planned this one more year for implementation. So the very structure of the draft bill stands still. We are not okay with some of the changes, like to exclude agriculture, but at the end of the day, it's okay, we can move on and live with that. But when it came to the chamber, that's the major modifications, yes. Just, I won't follow through all these changes, but just to give you a flavor of visual impression of how many changes they did. And as I mentioned, especially regarding REDD+ activities. So we are very, very, very worried about these changes. But this is the law we have, the bill we have right now on the table. The government is already working to try to reverse the most problematic issues, but the political process is very uncertain at the moment. The Chamber of Deputies used a legal device to ensure that any major change to the test will result in the test has to come back to the lower house, but it's still uncertain if the Senate will accept this maneuver. So there's a political, very political, juridical, technical issue, but we are hoping that something will happen and for the best, and then we can come back at least for this test. I think that's, I'll leave it at that. And thank you for the opportunity to share what's going on in Brazil. And if you have some questions,
thank you for the Thanks for the excellent overview, Beatrice. I think everyone on the panel will be able to sympathize with the with the hurdles that are needed to take a proposal through the legislative process, and it can be quite hard to reconcile different interests and different interest groups from stakeholders around one single proposal. Speaking of which, Canada is a jurisdiction that has carefully crafted their climate policy setting exactly to reconcile different stakeholders group, but also different levels of governance within one single overarching policy package. So before closing this first round, I want to go to Simon and ask you to give us a quick update on the policy setting in Canada.
Sure thing. Thanks, Stefano. Yeah, so maybe I'll start briefly with sort of the overview background to how carbon pricing generally works in Canada, because it's a little bit complicated. I mean, broadly, we have about 80% of our national emissions covered under some form of carbon pricing or other, and it's through a mix of different systems. So we have a federal carbon pricing system, but we also have a bunch of different pricing systems at the provincial and territorial level. And the federal government in Canada sets national criteria that all of those different systems have to meet. So we set a minimum price level, which is currently at $80 Canadian per ton and is rising. It will rise up to $170 Canadian in 2030. So that minimum price applies to all of the different pricing systems in Canada. We have minimum requirements around the coverage of those systems, requirements around kind of how systems are designed to ensure that secondary markets maintain a strong price signal. So we have a range of different criteria that all of these different systems have to meet, and we evaluate those different systems. Originally, we had done it annually, but we've moved to kind of a multi-year assessment process. And so one of the things that happened last year was that whole set of criteria that the federal government established. We updated those criteria to ensure that the pricing systems were kind of most effective across the country. So some new criteria around those different systems took effect last year. And as was mentioned earlier, we also updated the federal component or one part of the federal component, which is this output-based pricing system for industry that applies in a few of our provinces. We updated that federal OBPS to do a number of things, but probably the most impactful was implement a tightening rate on basically on the free allocations that we provide to industry in that. And I should also just mention broadly the systems in Canada work through kind of a fuel charge that is applied on broadly kind of transportation and building fuels, and a variety of different types of emission trading systems for industry, which are largely implemented by the provincial governments, but we also have this federal system as well. Another kind of significant development that's kind of still underway that Stefano mentioned previously was this commitment by our government to cap the emissions from our oil and gas sector specifically, so from upstream oil and gas production. And so we're kind of in the regulatory development process right now for that. But last year, at the end of the year, we published a regulatory framework explaining kind of the broad design. And so the idea is we will be implementing a new national cap and trade system that applies specifically to upstream oil and gas production across Canada. And this is in addition to existing carbon pricing that we already have. So for example, a lot of our oil and gas production is in a few provinces in Western Canada, Alberta, BC, Saskatchewan. They already have carbon pricing systems in place that apply to upstream oil and gas producers. This cap and trade system would be in addition to that. So we have some kind of, this is maybe one of these examples of some innovation, some experimentation in terms of how different carbon pricing systems can interact with each other. And so we're in the midst of designing that new cap and trade system at the moment. We've been having consultations with industry, and we're planning to publish draft regulations a bit later this year, and final regulations next year, and then the cap would kind of be phased in starting in 2026 to 2030. But the broad goal is to design this in line with our net zero goals by 2050. I'll also briefly mention we have an offset credit system in Canada that was put in place a couple of years ago in 2022, but we continue to build that system. And broadly, the project types are kind of in forestry, agriculture, waste sectors. Those credits can be used for compliance in our federal output-based pricing system for industry. And we're also expecting that this new oil and gas cap and trade system will be another source of demand for those credits. So we've designed this to be kind of a very high integrity offset credit system for use in these compliance markets. And we're still kind of in the process of developing different project protocols. So we have a couple of protocols that have been published around landfill methane, one around refrigeration systems. We have a number that are in the works, some for forests, some for agricultural sector. We have one around direct air capture. So those we're hoping to publish kind of over the course of this year and a bit beyond. And then briefly, just to close out, I'll also mention an initiative that's been kind of high on our priority list internationally that Stefano referenced, the Global Carbon Pricing Challenge, which a number of ICAP members are partners to, and that ICAP is very heavily involved in as well, sort of a key partner. Broadly, this is it's kind of a partnership of jurisdictions who are implementing or interested in carbon pricing. There was a lot of momentum that built last year. We now have 11 partners and friends. Many of them joined in 2023. We have an independent secretariat that's been established. And the overarching kind of headline goal of this challenge is to try to reach 60% of global GHG emissions covered by some form of carbon pricing system by 2030. So obviously an ambitious target, especially if we look at the results in the latest report. But it's good to have a stretch goal, is the way we think about it. And so broadly, this is kind of an initiative that has kind of political events, and we're also working on a variety of technical exchanges. We have some workshops coming up. Yeah, that's another kind of key priority for us in the carbon pricing, in the kind of international collaboration side of things, which is also a key goal for ICAP. So that's an update on Canada. Thanks.
Thanks for the really good update, Simon, and congratulations again on launching the Global Carbon Pricing Challenge. I mean, ICAP is excited about being part of it, and we're also really looking forward to what will come next under that effort. It is obviously really, really important. Let's start to delve now into the Q&A, and we are getting we did receive a good set of questions already. And I would again invite all participants to put any question you might have in the Q&A function of the webinar. I'll start with one of the issues that Simon just touched on, actually, and we did receive quite a few questions on whether the use of offsets is allowed or not across the different systems represented on the panel. So if you don't mind, I would like to quickly go around the panel and ask each one of you how your system is looking at or already regulating the use of offset credits. And in particular, I think it would be interesting to see if, in case you're looking at the use of offsets, if that mainly concerns domestic ones or also international offsets under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Let's start from Mette again.
Yes, thank you, Stefano. So overall, in the EU ETS that is currently in place, and also on the new ETS that's going to start in 27, we don't allow for offset credits. But with the revision in 2023, we have allowed, or we have actually already allowed, but it's become easier. We allow for carbon capture and storage. So industry can capture CO2 and store it, and then they can be allowed not to surrender for those emissions. So that is kind of the elements that we do allow for. But we do not have, shall we say, external offset credits that can come into the system. That was a short answer.
Thank you. On to Hannah then.
Yes, very similar in the UK. So we currently do not allow any use of offsets, international or domestic, into the scheme. Yeah, and I guess the only exception to that would be the stated intention to look at incorporating greenhouse gas removal technologies into the scheme in the long term. But again, I think that the focus there is on domestic integration of greenhouse gas removals. Yeah. So hopefully that's clear. That's all.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Anna. On to Derek.
Yes, so we have 4 different types of offsets that we currently accept. We had our first 3 offset projects generated a little bit ago that were all ozone depleting substances. I always disclaim that offsets is my area of lowest expertise. So, but we initially adopted California and Quebec, California's protocols, which we felt was good in terms of offset developers already knowing the existing rules of the road for those projects. We have 2 offset registries that we've got operational for our program to work with. Something that I think is notable about our program, we call offsets under the cap. So to the extent offsets are used for compliance, we do reduce our future budgets by that same amount. So that's a 1-for-1 reduction in the allowances, which we feel allows us to stay on track for our emissions targets. And then lastly, sorry for all these details, we do set a specific maximum of allowable offsets for a company's compliance. So this isn't something where they can use 100% offsets, it's up to 8% and 3% of those being on tribal lands.
Thank you. On to Bea then.
As I mentioned, our law foresee the use of carbon credits, but it gives only general provisions, and all the hard decisions will be done during the reglementation of the law. We haven't decided what kind of projects we're going to accept and what kind of methodologies. It's going to work more or less like work in California. We're going to predicate the methodologies, and the percentage also, it's all going to be dealt in the reglementation.
Thank you. And Simon, I know that you already covered it quite well, but is it, I mean, what you said and what you described, does it mainly apply to domestic offsets within Canada or international ones as well?
So right now, primarily, right now it's only domestic, and there's kind of a general preference for prioritizing domestic offsets. And maybe just to sort of add a little bit, so there's like all the other things in Canada, it's a little bit complicated by all of our different systems. So we have this federal offset system. Some of our provinces also have their own offset systems, and so offsets generally can be used under most of our ETS systems for industry, but there's some variation in different parts of the country. And I would say in general, from the federal perspective, like we're kind of picky about offsets. So we have these pretty high standards that we've set in our own system. We generally are prioritizing domestic, but we are actively thinking about ITMOs and considering kind of, I guess we're closely following developments internationally, and we're thinking about potentially enabling them for some domestic systems, including possibly for this the forthcoming oil and gas cap and trade system. But of course, there would still be a number of steps to actually fully operationalize that.
Thank you. And I'm conscious that we're running out of time, but if you allow me for a super last final round of questions to the panel, I wanted to touch on something that came through a question just now, and it's about ETS revenue. And I mean, this is also, as Luis presented, one of the issues that we explored a bit more in detail this year. And at a time when the social acceptability of carbon pricing and emission trading systems is such a heated topic, I think this communication angle to it is quite interesting. And the question specifically is asking what your regions are doing to showcase the use of ETS revenues, and what steps do you take to highlight the benefits of ETS. So can I ask you to quickly comment on it in 30 seconds, and then we come to a close, starting with Mette again.
Yes, thank you. Very quickly, yes, we do think it's important to report on revenues. This is very much linked to the social acceptance and the acceptance of the ETS. So we have a report every year on the use of revenues by member states. So that is a detailed report where you can see how the money has been spent. But we also publish very clearly what we kind of finance at European level for innovation, all the innovation projects, what we do for modernization of energy systems, and also already now on the social aspects in the new social climate fund that will also be funded by revenue. So yes, the short answer is very, very important to showcase.
Thank you, Mette. On to Hannah.
Thanks, Stefano. Yes, very quickly. So probably quite unusual in the UK in that we do not earmark ETS revenue specifically for different purposes. With any revenue across the UK, it goes into the consolidated fund. So everything goes into the same central pot. Not to say that we don't have substantive funds for climate change, for technological innovation. It's just that they're kept sort of distinct. But it's a really important area, and certainly around sort of the social acceptance of carbon pricing schemes and communication. So it's always something that we're thinking about. But at the moment, we don't have that direct correlation in the UK.
Thank you. And Derek, you said that auctioning is your baby, and Washington has a Cap and Invest program. So can you tell us a bit more about how that works and what you do to communicate that?
Yeah, and so I also saw that there were a number of questions in the Q&A for our program. I just plug, we have a listserv, and I think a link is about to be dropped into the chat where you can go to our website and sign up for that listserv to learn more. So yeah, we have a report that we're required to do, and I think it's a great idea to do every year, where we look at revenue use. Because our program is so new, like we've only done 5 quarterly auctions at this point. We didn't have much detail on the different uses of revenue previously, but this next report would show a lot more detail when it comes out.
Thank you. On to Simon.
Thanks. So we do certainly publish information around how the revenues from the ETS system, at least the federal system, is used. I guess I would say in Canada, the more kind of substantive public side of things on revenues is not actually the revenues from the ETS, but from the fuel charge, which is kind of the bulk of revenues that we collect. And the majority of that is given directly back to individuals and households through lump sum payments that are broadly progressive, like the lowest income households get the most back, or they get more back than they pay. And for anybody who happens to follow any news from Canada, carbon pricing is quite a political hot button issue at the moment here, and so some of these details around revenue return to individuals and households has become kind of a very, very live public debate. So that's kind of taken up most of the oxygen around the public discourse around how revenues are used, and there's less focus, I would say, on how the ETS revenues specifically are used, which we use for a variety of purposes broadly for kind of decarbonization programs, across different industry sectors, but we do have annual reports that we put out that show all the revenues and how they get allocated.
Thank you. And Beatrice, is there any discussion already on what kind of use of revenues Brazil will make?
Yeah, the first proposal of the government was to use it to innovation and financing mitigation policies and a little bit to run the system as well. But this is one of the changes that the chamber made, huge modification, and they put into the tourism fund and the National Bank fund that we are not very clear about what it means. So it's one of the things that we wanted to change a little bit, if we can.
Thank you. And with that, conscious that we are over time already, I would like to bring the panel discussion and the webinar to a close. Before I do that, a big thank you to the 5 panelists that joined us today. As always, it's always inspiring to hear from practitioners that are at the forefront of ETS implementation. So thank you for joining us. Big thanks to Lewis, Anastasia, and the broader ICAP team, who again produced an excellent report. And thanks to also all of the ICAP members who support the work of ICAP and patiently also support the production of the status report whenever we get in touch to ask all sorts of information and data that eventually end up in the report. So thank you to all of you. Without all of you, this wouldn't be possible. And last but not least, thank you also to all the attendees to the webinar. I think we got a record number of registrations and participation this year, which is a testament to the fact that it is always an important topic. So thank you for spending the last 90 minutes or so with us talking about the state of play in ETS implementation. Again, you will find the report on our website. Also keep an eye out in the coming weeks for new products and activities from ICAP. And if you want to hear from a different set of panelists, we will do this again at 9 a.m. tomorrow, European time, with a focus on the Asia Pacific jurisdictions. Thank you all, and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you, Stefano.